I'm going on that
so
assumption.
we are all set. Yeah.
Jafar, you can lead us off.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all the participants. This is our webinar series. We started this about 6-7 months ago. We try to do a couple of webinars per month, and I welcome you to this session. The idea that we have designed for the webinar is that we want to talk about some of the topics that typically are not discussed in tourism. By and large, tourism focuses on formal sector of tourism, which means mega destinations, mega airlines, mega chain hotels, mega everything, mass tourism. And often small operators, SMEs, or even smaller micro entrepreneurs, small destinations are ignored, are not receiving any attention. When the virus began, these people in the informal sector even had no ideas where to go to ask for help. And even if they knew where to go to ask for help, they didn't know what sort of help might be available to them. This is not a situation you may find in the formal sector because they are connected to government, they are connected to banks, they are connected to the institutions, and they know what the problem is, by and large, and they know what the solutions might be. So we came to this focus, and then came the issue of climate change, climate-friendly travel, etc. And of course, the person who is on the top of this topic, has been on the top of this topic, is Jeffrey Lipman, who is known to all of you. So I discussed this with him, and I said whether he would frame the topic in a way that deals with the issues that the informal sector of tourism is facing. Small tourism communities, small operators, small destinations, whether they're year-round or seasonal, doesn't matter. And he agreed to do so. I know global issues, climate change, etc., are really global. But when you really think about in tourism, tourism is not really dominated by formal tourism. It is, if you add up the informal sector together, that mass is going to be larger than the formal sector. So we are talking about informal sector, which is made up of small pieces, which collectively is pretty big. And that is the group we are trying to help. The problem is that for the informal sector, sometimes some of the topics are not tangible. They may not seem to be relevant. They may not seem to be of immediate importance, etc. And that is, of course, a task that webinars like this have to make it meaningful to them. So for that reason, we go to a global issue, which is climate change and the impact of it on tourism. And we have Jeffrey and his team, whom he is going to introduce to take us to this subject. Jeffrey really requires no introduction. What I want to say only one thing about him. He's one of the few people, and by few I mean a few people who understands academia in tourism and the industry. And there are very few people who do that. We academicians, we know the books and articles and the journals, and we talk about those theories sometimes in the thin air. We never bring it down. We often do not bring it down. And the industry, which is entirely in a different world of its own, and the two are not really communicating with each other. So he's the one who has built a bridge in the past between academia and the travel industry. And indeed, I'm working with him, and he's helping me with a different project, which we call transfer of knowledge to and within tourism. And that is how we can transfer the huge knowledge that academia has produced to the field of practice. boots on the ground. That's what we would like to do. And we do conferences for that as well. But I don't want to talk about that one now. I want to talk about this webinar series, and that we are here to assist with the informal sector in tourism. So Jeffrey, thank you very much for putting this webinar together. I have worked with you for some years, initially from a distance, and more recently, we have been working very closely with each other, and I have benefited from the work I have done with you, and I look forward to continue with our work. Jeffrey, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Jafar. Kazem, much appreciate being asked to do this. I'm Jeff Lippman. I have been a bureaucrat in travel and tourism for almost half a century. I spent 20 years as the executive director, ultimately, of IATA, the airline organization, in Montreal and in Geneva. I spent another 10 years as Assistant Secretary General at the UN World Tourism Organization in Madrid. And I was the first president for 10 years of the World Travel and Tourism Council, which is now widely recognized as being the lead organization for those industry players that Jafar was talking about, who are the big players who largely have determined the shape and pace and scale of development of this incredible human activity that we call tourism. Latterly, I have, like Jafar, but not with the same credentials or reputation as Jafar. I'm a visiting professor at Victoria University in Australia and have been involved with 2 or 3 other universities. And I'm also the president of SUNx Malta, which I'll explain to you in my opening remarks. And today I'm going to moderate this session, which is about climate-friendly travel for a green and clean future. Climate-friendly travel for a green and clean future. And I hope by the time we finish this session, you'll understand precisely what we mean by that. The format that we're going to take, I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, and I'm going to try to give you a feeling of where climate change and travel and tourism intersect, and what we are doing in SUNx Malta to help the tourism sector, and that's companies and communities, big and small, help to adapt in the same way that the rest of society, and particularly other industrial sectors, are responding to the climate crisis. I'll talk a little bit about that. And when I've finished, my colleagues in SUNx Malta, who are with me today, Hans Friedrich, who will introduce himself before his remarks, and who is now the registrar of the SUNx Malta Climate Friendly Travel Ambitions Registry for 2050. He will follow me. Then we will have Rose Makogo. Hans is in Malta, in Gozo. I'm in Brussels, in Belgium. Then we'll have Rose Makogo, who is our basically support services manager for the registry that we've created. And she's in Zimbabwe, in Central Southern Africa. And finally, Ollie Wheatcroft, who is the program manager of SUNx Malta, and he's based in the UK, formerly part of Europe. I'm on a webinar. No, sorry, excuse me. That's my home intervening in the webinar. The format's going to be loose and general, and we will, if there are questions and answers, we'll be happy to engage. And that's basically the purpose of this session, is to try to get a feeling of some sort of mutual understanding of how small and medium enterprises and small and medium communities can play an important part in a transformation that we think most of the people listening to this webinar will understand the world has decided it has to make. So with that, I am going to say a few words about the general context, about SUNx Malta, which is SUN stands for the Strong Universal Network. It's a legacy program for the late Maurice Strong, who is generally thought to be the father of sustainable development, who was a climate activist as far back as 1972, when he organized the Stockholm Earth Summit, the first Earth Summit. And he was my close friend and mentor for 25 years, since the Rio Earth Summit, which was the second big Earth Summit, which he again ran. And we created SUN, Maurice and I, with others, in 2010, after the big Copenhagen climate meeting, which people may recall had a huge build-up and then seemed to end with a little bit of a whimper rather than a bang. And we set SUN up to keep a focus on this intersect of travel and tourism and climate change, and to apply Maurice's vision of sustainable development and climate resilience. And we added the X a couple of years later because we wanted to always remind ourselves that the climate crisis is existential. And then latterly, 18 months ago, we partnered with the government of Malta to center our global activity on that small, incredibly beautiful Mediterranean island, which is an EU member state. And that's important because the EU is one of the leading players in climate response. And Malta was the country that actually put climate change on the UN General Assembly agenda back in 1987. So for a small state, it's had a pretty big influence. Now, it's against the background of the creation of SUNx Malta that I want to talk on the development of travel and tourism and climate change, and how it will affect and can be affected by small and medium-sized tourism companies and communities. We mustn't forget communities, because so much of the response is going to come from the communities, not through the tourism vector, but through the vector of sustainable energy and environmental change. And from a governance viewpoint, decisions which are being made in agencies who are not responsible for tourism, but which will significantly affect the future of travel and tourism, and will particularly affect the way that small communities and small companies operate at the local level, because there's a governance framework within which you will have to operate. So just the big picture, we're talking about a sector that drives 10% of the economy and accounts for a growing, dependent on how you measure it, 5 to 8% of carbon. And that's not insignificant now, but that's projected to grow rapidly over the coming 10, 20, 30 years, largely because the transport sector, and particularly air transport, produces a fair amount of carbon, and at the moment, unlike other industrial sectors or activities, has little opportunity to have an alternative power source. That's the first point I want to make. The second point is that significant elements of our business, aviation and cruises, are not handled within the normal government framework. For the most part, aviation and cruises are handled in different governance regimes. Aviation in a convention which runs from 1944, the Chicago Convention, and is governed by an organization called ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, with a very strong interrelated private sector impact from an organization called IATA, where I said I worked for 20 years, which is the airline organizing body. And they are not part of the Paris Climate Agreement. They're part of a separate agreement which came afterwards. And the second element, very important for our sector, is cruises. And cruises are not in the Paris Climate Agreement. They're handled under the International Maritime Organization, and they operate in the framework of the law of the sea. And these are big conventions which have governed the operation of these important transport elements, and they've governed them long before people were talking about having a climate convention, which is what the Paris Agreement is. Maybe 30, 40 years of operation. Another factor that's worth noting in general terms is we have a product, the patterns of tourism flows, the products which are offered, the operational frameworks under which you as tourism companies and communities operate have pretty much all been built on predictable weather. That pattern is changing. Weather across the planet is becoming increasingly unpredictable and increasingly extreme. Extremes of heat, extremes of cold, and impacts of nature as a consequence of that, which change the very framework under which tourism might be operated. And another element to take into account, these are all general elements. We're a central part of modern life. When our business is disrupted, it's felt across the economy. And there's no better example of that than COVID, where the first sector to truly suffer, and the sector which is almost a vector for the disease, is tourism, more than any other element. Planes stopped flying, cruise ships could no longer operate because they became hotbeds of COVID-19. So anything that affects anybody, anywhere, that is impacting on and impacted by travel and tourism. And then this is the point which is most important for this session. 80% of the activity, and that's a number that I challenge anybody to tell me where it comes from. I've been using it for 20 years. 80% of the activity involves small and medium companies and communities. When you look at the value chain, from the time of people deciding they want to take a trip for business or for leisure, and they actually choose their transport method, choose the place they're going to, choose the accommodation and what they'll do on site, and then begin to participate in the business, the collectivity of that product is made up by a significant number of small and medium enterprises being marshaled to provide a type of service for them. And there are very few other industrial sectors which have as much diversity and as much complexity and as interconnected, extended supply chains as the travel and tourism sector. And every small and medium enterprise and every small community is a big player when it comes to dealing with individual travelers who arrive and expect a full service product from you. And then last point, there are more than 5 billion trips taken every year, international and domestic. 5 billion. 1 billion plus is international, 4 times that domestic. We touch everyone, everywhere. If you're not a travel and tourism traveler, visitor, you're a host. And it doesn't matter where you are. And because of the definition of travel and tourism, we are significantly important in every country, but particularly important to developing states where our sector provides a lifeline to the future, a place of education of young people, and particularly small island developing states, because they have built up their economies around tourism. And as far as concerns climate change, this can change everything I've just described. Everything. We think COVID-19 has changed everything, and it has. It's changed the way whether people travel, where they travel to, how they travel, and indeed, even if they travel. And the patterns are changing almost every day. And even with a vaccine, which now seems to be slowly emerging, those patterns are going to remain disrupted for at least 12 to 18 months and probably more. So we have seen as a sector what disruption of a global crisis like COVID can do. Well, my point today, and this is the main point I want to make, the climate crisis is going to be like COVID on steroids. COVID on steroids. You've seen the impacts of floods, of droughts, of forest fires, of permafrost burning, as well as the human displacement, the misery, and the conflict it causes. Here's a really important figure. It's estimated that there have been 10 million climate refugees over the past decade. 10 million groups of people whose agriculture has suddenly dried up, or whose water is no longer available, and who have had to move to new locations with all of the disruption, the xenophobia, the challenges that humanity faces as a consequence. 10 million in the last decade. The figure which is forecast for the next decade is 100 million. 10 times that amount. Imagine the impact that that has on politics, on sovereignty, and on economics, and on decency and humanity. And this is a huge worry for everybody who's looking at this issue seriously. So it's against that background of the danger of the climate crisis that we believe at SUNx Malta that our sector has to deepen its climate response. We did an analysis last year with the World Travel and Tourism Council of a sector-wide scan of what we're doing to adapt ourselves to this coming crisis, and B, to play our part in the agreed global response, which is basically the Paris Agreement, which says that we have to drastically reduce carbon and other greenhouse gases, but particularly carbon, that's the most significant one, And we have to reduce it country by country because every country's situation is different, and every company and every community situation is different. But the international community set up a system in the Paris Agreement that says over the next 30 or 40 years, up till 2050, we have to collectively reduce our carbon output in such a way that our overall global temperature doesn't increase by more than 2% on historic levels. I won't bore you with how they work that out. Jeff, our academics can tell me better how to do this, but it's basically we must collectively control the temperature of the planet, the whole planet, through our individual national actions. And those individual national actions are being worked out to this very day, every day, in environment departments and in energy departments and in financial and economic departments, seeing what kind of incentives, what kind of penalties they can place, so that at big moments in the future, 2025, 2030, 2040, and ultimately by 2050, we have collectively, big and small, brought under control our carbon output so that the blanket which surrounds the Earth and which is causing global warming is somehow contained, and the planet has a chance to get back into a better balance with nature. That's what the Paris Agreement says we have to do, and it then charges individual countries to make their own national programs to collectively achieve that product. And the UN Climate Agency, the UNFCCC, which stands for the Framework Convention on Climate Change, FCCC, which was established under the leadership of Maurice Strong some 25 years ago, after the Rio Earth Summit in 1995. That agency is collecting all these government and industry projections for carbon reduction. And then what it is doing is aggregating this information, providing it to the scientific community, and allowing transparency for countries and communities and companies to show what they're doing and to adapt it if they're not meeting these evolving global requirements. That's the big task. And at SUNx Malta, we've created, and if we don't do this, last point, if we don't do this, all the science tells us is that in 30 years' time, our planetary boundaries will have been breached to such an extent, life becomes uninhabitable. Uninhabitable. Our grandkids will have the option of freezing or of frying. That's what it will boil down to if we don't collectively take this action. And what we've created at SUNx Malta, and I'll skip through this fairly quickly, is what we've called a systems approach to help travel and tourism companies and communities make this transformation. And I remind you, our analysis said we are not going far enough, we are not going fast enough. Lots of nice talk, lots of declarations, ambitions, but what matters to the rest of the non-travel and tourism world is action to reduce our impacts and action to collectively stay within those big global norms established by the Paris Agreement. And in developing our systems approach at SUNx Malta, we're taking account of the lessons of COVID. What has become clear is there's a less frenetic pace in our activities. Even Zoom meetings like this one are avoiding a lot of travel, which most of us assumed was either necessary or desirable, or hopefully both, before we were forced into a situation where we couldn't do it. So our Building Back Better understanding takes account of that. And then the enforced awareness, which we've had during this period, of the power of nature, how nature can suddenly bring society to a halt through an infinitely tiny virus. And yet the brilliance of the green solutions that nature presents to so many issues. And we've learned that our kids can actually see the skies better and hear the birds sing, which many people had forgotten about under the frenetic pace of the pre-COVID era. So our vision of climate-friendly travel has three components. It has to be low carbon. Anybody entering this framework has to enter it with a mindset that says, I'm going to reduce my carbon output, however I do that. If I'm a railway company, I'll do it differently than if I'm renting cars out, or if I'm an ecotourism or adventure tourism provider. If I'm an airline, I have my own kind of specific problems. But whatever I am in this sector, and whatever community I'm, if I'm a city, if I'm a small village, if I'm a coastal resort, if I'm somewhere in the desert, I have to move to a low carbon economic activity. That's the first point. It has to be low carbon. The second point is it has to be linked to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. That's a 10-year time frame with 17 goals, 169 targets, 230 indicators about everything: life on Earth, life underwater, industry, climate development, poverty, gender equality. It's all in the Sustainable Development Goals. So in our vision of climate-friendly travel, travel and tourism companies have to find those goals, those targets which work for them. And they'll all be different for every individual company. And the third thing is it has to be aligned with the Paris 1.5 pathway. I said before that Paris said we mustn't exceed 2 degrees. But it also said, ideally, we should be aiming for 1.5 degrees. And in the 5 years since Paris, the scientific research has told us that we're going to overshoot by a significant amount unless we all focus on the 1.5 degrees. And we have to start focusing on it now. So that's the essence of climate-friendly travel. Low carbon, SDG-linked, Paris 1.5 pathway. And what is noteworthy is that in recent weeks, the UN Secretary General has actually been talking about tourism, and he said that, I quote, all post-pandemic tourism should be climate friendly. And that will require measurement, projections, and it will also have to reflect the national and regional carbon reduction frameworks that I talked about before. If your country, wherever you are, has a carbon reduction commitment to be 55% less in 2030, as the European Union agreed only yesterday, you better be aligned in some way to that starting now, because it will become national law and you will be forced to do it if you haven't prepared to do it. So we have built a UNFCCC linked Climate Friendly Travel 2050 Ambitions Registry. And we've designed it to help stakeholders create clean carbon reduction strategic and operational plans and complementing their green sustainability plans. And it's public, it's transparent, it allows consumers to look at what their travel companies and communities are saying they're going to do. And it requires a filing of actual numbers of carbon output and estimates of how they will be reduced. And we believe that eventually all travel and tourism companies and communities will have to join this registry so that our sector can actually present itself inside the global development framework. Other sectors are already filing for some time and are feeding their information into the UN Climate Agency. Our registry is designed to allow even the smallest to make a plan. Our system is designed to help the smallest understand these issues. And I don't want to tread on what Hans is going to say, but this is a starting point for a new future. We've also launched, and this is if creating a plan and registering it is one arm of our activity, the other arm is capacity building. We've launched a climate-friendly travel diploma to build transformation support capacity into future operations. Young activists, I call them our own Greta Thunbergs, to make 100,000 strong climate champions by 2030 to seed national changemaker communities in all UN states. And next year, together with partners in Canada, in Malta, and in the Mekong region, for the Americas, for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and for Asia Pacific, we will hold the first annual Morris Strong Climate Friendly Travel Youth Summit to reach out to a much broader community of young people to help shape the green and clean future that we all aspire to. I want to finish my remarks by underscoring here our commitment to this next generation, because it's their world that we're really fighting for. And it's young people who have such a clear vision, a demanding need, and a positive creativity, a creativity of hope, if we can only act and get it right. And I believe we have to embrace and we have to help channel their enthusiasm and support their just demands for a decent opportunity. We must look at this world through their eyes, and we have to tune out much of our routine business we're comfortable with mindset. So we're encouraging companies and communities to commit to climate-friendly travel, to register their reduction ambitions, to fully implement sustainability and climate action plans, and to engage with tomorrow's young leaders, to sponsor them for courses like our diploma, and to inspire them in a broader community outreach to help create tomorrow's green and clean travel future. Working with our sector leadership in lockstep with the World Travel and Tourism Council, we are going to showcase this renewed commitment in the COP26 framework, which is the UN Climate Summit framework, which they hold every year. And this one is in Glasgow at the end of this year. And we will take this philosophy that I've discussed today, this practical system, and we will bring it into the UN halls and into the UN discussions. And we want small and medium communities to be a fundamental part of it. And also because funding will emerge to help this transformation. And we think that small and medium communities, particularly in developing countries and small island states, must be the first recipients of that funding. As Maurice Strong always said, the future will not just happen. It will be what we make of it together. And I thank you for listening to that overview. And I'm going to now ask my friend Hans Friedrich to talk for 5 to 8 minutes about his position as the registrar, about the registry, and his vision about how the registry can help the future of small and medium communities. Hans, the floor is yours.
Please unmute yourself, Hans. You're muted.
Sorry for that. Thank you. And thanks, Jafar. Thank you, Kazem, for inviting us to explain what we're doing. And thank you, Jeffrey, for giving that introduction. I don't want to repeat what Jeffrey has said, but as the registrar, I would like to explain a little bit what my role is. First, let me explain where I come from, because that may be of interest to you. I'm not a tourism expert like Jeffrey. My career has been in natural resources management and sustainable development. Many years working for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, a few years for the UNDP development program, and the last 5 years as the Director General of the International Bamboo and Rattan organization based in China. But it's always been linked to working on how we can work with nature to provide better future for the planet. And climate change has always been part of that discussion right from the start. I've lived in different places in Africa, in Asia. I lived for a while in Switzerland as well. And currently I am based on a small island in the Mediterranean, Gozo, which is the sister island of Malta. My role in the SUNx program that Jeffrey described is the registrar of the registry that he talked about. And as Jeffrey said, what we are trying to achieve is that collectively we can make a change, and collectively, therefore, we have to register our carbon reduction plans. We want to do that through this new climate-friendly registry that we have created together with WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council, and that is directly linked to the Climate Action Portal, which is where countries and other bigger industry lodge their ambitions. So the idea is that our registry will actually provide the conduit, the entry point, as it were, for the tourism industry, for the tourism communities, for the tourism and travel sector into the global UN climate action. And I think that's one of the important aspects of this registry. It is going to be the registry that will allow you, even if you are a small enterprise, even if you're an individual or a small hotel, to actually make sure that your action, your ambition, and your plans will contribute to what is happening in the global arena. And as we've seen with COVID, collectively we can make a difference. So we believe if collectively we can register these plans, we can make a difference and we can have impact from the travel and tourism industry. The other reason why we believe it's important to register is, as Jeffrey said, countries are starting to realize that climate is a critical issue for their economy, a critical issue for their socio-economic development. And countries are therefore starting to make it law that you have to think about climate and that you have to reduce your carbon. He mentioned the EU. I'm thinking about New Zealand as well, and other countries are starting to talk about it. So if you as a tourism or a travel enterprise do not take action now, you will be finding that in 5 or 10 years' time, you all of a sudden have to do something. We can help you to prepare for that by registering now. I think a third reason why it's important to register is that the clients, the visitors, people in general are starting to talk about climate change. And I think more and more people are realizing that climate change is an issue. It is no longer an issue of the future. It is happening now. We see it around us. And therefore people want to know, if I go somewhere, what is the impact that my travel brings? But also, are the people that I'm working with, that I'm living with, and that I'm dealing with actually concerned about the environmental impact? And will they help me to keep my footprint as low as possible? So we are basically providing that opportunity. We're providing it for large and small. We are working with the WTTC to get in some of these large hotel chains and the large cruise liners to be part of it. But we also want to work with others to bring the small and medium enterprises on board. We basically say step one is you declare that climate is important. And our registry is built up in that way that section A of the registration is really no more than making a statement, making a commitment that you want to do something about climate, which you sign. But we don't want to stop there. It's easy to make a declaration. It's easy to say you want to do something. So part B of our declaration really is to put together a plan that actually will come up with data. We are asking you to find out what your carbon footprint is at this moment in time, what you expect it to be by 2030, and what you're aiming it to be by 2050, and how you want to do that. As Jeffrey said, we realized that whilst SDG 13, Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate change is the critical one that we're dealing with, a lot of what small, medium, and larger companies will do has impact and links with all the other Sustainable Development Goals. So we are also asking you to basically tell us which one is most relevant to your enterprise. And with all of that, we will provide guidance, we will provide access to information. And I want to ask Rose to tell us a bit more about that. Rose works with me on this registry. We together are the backup, as it were, to make things happen. But a lot of that we will do by basically providing assistance and providing guidance through other people that are working in this field. We're not going to be able to make the plans for others. We think it is the responsibility of the individual enterprise, the individual company, the individual community, but we will help where we can. So with that, Rose, can I hand over to you and say a bit more how you think we can help small and medium enterprises?
Thank you so much, Hans, for that presentation. May I take this opportunity to thank Jafar and Kazem for this invitation, and of course to thank Jeffrey for inviting me to participate in this exciting project. One reason maybe why I agreed to this participation to be part of this project is, he said, Rose, if we don't do anything, we are going to either fry or freeze. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then this issue that climate change is going to be like COVID on steroids, that frightened me. And of course, through the fact that I'm the only lady in this program so far, of course, we have some assistance, but I guess this is all about the fact that the earth is called Mother Earth. So maybe my maternal instinct might also help in terms of gazing into the future. The biggest challenge, I guess I said I should also maybe share where I come from or my background. I have a consulting company called Green Tourism Services based in Zimbabwe, in Harare, Zimbabwe. I have been in the tourism industry for the last 2 decades. I am an economist by profession. I have been a board member. Maybe most of my tourism career has really been in the public sector, policy development, in the Ministry of Tourism, Environment and Tourism. I was the first director for research for the Zimbabwe Tourism Authority. I worked with Jeffrey when we were building an airport. I also was a board member for the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority for 12 years, chairperson of the board of the Forestry Commission. So my background really has been in sustainable natural resources management. And I have a passion for the tourism industry. So with that, I am going to be responsible, or I am responsible for the support services for the registry. Part A is, Hans has said, is quite clear, it's easy. It's a commitment to a relationship, let me put it that way. Part B becomes like the marriage, where one has to navigate around the issues of recording the various initiatives. It sounds complicated because if one is asked about estimate the date of peak of the annual carbon emissions, or the scope of your actions, or can you let us know about the annual carbon output? It sounds very complicated. And these are the issues which are critical, because if we don't measure these various initiatives, then we cannot talk about a registry, or we cannot talk about mitigating climate change. So my responsibility will be to assist in holding the hands of the registrants who now want to move to Part B, to help them and direct them to the various resources which we have as part of this program. We have an innovation hub, which will talk about what other organizations, operators are doing to assist in these declarations. We also have a strategy hub, which will give directions on how to strategize in terms of what the various registrants will be looking at in terms of their initiatives. What I will be doing is not necessarily to do the plans on behalf of the operators, because basically this is a program which is homegrown. We cannot have one size fits all, because we are in different places. I heard that Malta is actually getting cold. We are screaming here in Zimbabwe because it's getting extra hot. At some stage, there was talk that the Victoria Falls, the mighty Victoria Falls, was going to dry up. So the plans cannot be the same. But what we are going to be doing as the registry is to hold the hands of those who want to register, especially on the Part B, for at least 2 years. We will show you, or we'll show the operators where to get the information to make their plans. So in a nutshell, what we are going to be doing in the support services is to make sure and ensure that whoever is interested, whoever is going to register, they will not lose their heart, they will not be frustrated, because we'll be walking the journey together. But in the way that we are sharing information and guiding the registrants on where to get information to put together their ambitions and their plans. I think so far this is what I can share. And I would like to say again, thank you so much for this invitation. we are really excited that we have come this far because we're the first in the travel and tourism industry. And I think it will really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Let me just add a dimension. You've listened now to Hans's vision and Rose's vision of how what the registry will do and how it will operate. It only works if people in the travel and tourism community want to register. And we've made it live now. It costs, I say it costs nothing, but I mean, there's a filing fee of 50 euros a year for people to register. We did not want to have any financial barrier to people making a declaration about their ambitions and starting the journey. And then, as Rose mentioned, we've provided a number of support mechanisms for innovation, for getting some promotion by being part of this community, which is deciding to advance climate-friendly travel. And Rose's job will be to point people to those areas which can help them. We have a massive information we've been curating, and all of you know, every day on the web, there's more and more information. Excuse me. We've tried to create a very simple system, particularly with our innovation hub, which Rose mentioned, so that if you're a small community in India or a small company in Australia, you might go into this innovation hub on the web and find something a company's doing in Peru or in Egypt that can give you inspiration as to how you can make those changes yourself. It's one thing to say there is no one size fits all for dealing with this problem, and that's, you know, it's like a hackneyed phrase which we all accept. But the real challenge is for the individual company and community, a small enterprise, a small village which has got a tourism income stream and visitor stream, to decide how it can create its low carbon, its linkages to the Sustainable Development Goals, and its linkages to the Paris regime. And we have tools and we have examples of what other companies have done. Rose's job will be to help you find those which are useful to yourself. So with that, I'm going to thank Rose, thank Hans, and we'll have questions and answers afterwards. I want to ask Ollie Wheatcroft, who's the program manager of SUNx Malta, and without whom the program simply couldn't exist, because Ollie picks up all the pieces and makes them work. And I want to ask him to talk now about our program for young people and our plans for how we can integrate ourselves into the good vision of young people. Flight shame is something which I'm uncomfortable with. I've been involved in aviation all my life. I'd like us to have a sort of flying that people are not ashamed about. Young people will travel if they feel that travel is climate friendly. So Ollie's going to talk about our programs for young people and how that fits into this SUNx Malta vision of climate friendly travel. Ollie, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Jeffrey. Thanks very much also, Jafar and Kazem. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar series that I think is very admirable. As Jeffrey said, I'm the program manager at SUNx Malta. That means that I'm responsible for working with Jeffrey on all of the operational and strategic side of developing the program. This has included helping to put together our registry, which was built by the same people who created the UNFCCC Global Climate Action Portal. It's been also the other pillar of our work at the moment has been mentioned, our climate friendly travel diploma, where we have 43 amazing students from over 30 countries around the world who are studying to take on the knowledge that we're teaching through Jeffrey, myself and a colleague at the Institute of Tourism Studies in Malta, but also with 25 of the world's leading academics and experts on climate change and tourism. Jafar is part of the lecturers there, and it really is an amazing program, and it's very much core to this empowerment of the next generation of climate champions, which I'm going to talk about. And finally, the other piece of our work is our Climate Champions program, which I'm going to explain about this afternoon. Together that makes up the bulk of our work. And in addition to that, there's all the other pieces which Jeffrey has gone into detail about. My background is sustainable tourism, particularly with a focus on digital destination marketing. I'm an environmentalist. I've been working in travel and tourism for just over 20 years now. And so when Jeffrey approached me about working with him to develop the SUN program, I jumped at the opportunity because it brings together all the things which I'm passionate about, the focus on sustainable development of tourism, but with the sole focus on climate change because of its existential nature. It is what, you know, gets me up in the morning and makes me so proud to work on developing this program. The Climate Champions program is really focused on education and training of young people, but also people who are already established professionals within the travel and tourism industry. What we're trying to create is a global education and training program to support 100,000 climate champions by 2030. And that's in all countries around the world through a series of country-based initiatives, which are supported through the private sector in the form of sponsorship, who are going to empower groups of 50 climate champions in each of those destinations. And we want to roll that out gradually. At the moment, we have programs based in Bali and Cambodia, which is supported by the EXO Foundation, which is the charitable arm of EXO Travel, who are a fantastic partner, who we're very proud to work with. We're working there with local academic partners to promote the opportunity to people within their universities, but also people within the wider tourism community in those destinations. And we've also launched a program in Greece, in Crete, which is supported by the Chania Hotel Association. And again, that is very much, it's different in terms of the type of people that we are sort of appealing to, but the essence of the program is the same. It's all about identifying people who understand the importance of tackling climate change due to its existential nature, and they want to become part of a wider network of people who are working together and focusing their careers around making a difference in whatever shape or form. The way in which it's actually going to be supported is through the people who are taking our climate friendly travel diploma. These people are going through 12 months of intensive training through an online course which we're delivering. And our aim is to create a program which trains the trainers. These people, the graduates from the climate friendly travel diploma, are going to go out into their home communities and the places where we have these country programs to identify pools of potential climate champions. And they're going to use the knowledge which they have learned on this online diploma to create intensive training programs to share their knowledge through the diploma to essentially empower these young people to go on to pursue careers, research, whatever their chosen area is, to make a difference within this area of climate-friendly travel. The process for identifying those climate champions is actually quite simple. We have created a very straightforward application process, which is based on people explaining fairly concisely about why they will benefit from entering into this program. And at the core of the program is access to a portal, an information platform, which is all focused on multimedia resources and information on climate-friendly travel. And in a moment, I'm going to risk screen sharing so I can give you a very quick overview and just a taste of what that actually entails. But essentially, what we're doing is we're acting as curators. All of this information is already available in the public domain, but the challenge is to find the stuff which is really, really useful. And there's so much of it. And we have a fantastic person, my colleague Anna, who is on this call at the moment, who goes out there and she acts as a filter to find the most valuable and useful content, whether it is a report produced by the World Bank or a video with Vandana Shiva on a particular aspect of the environmental movement. It could be Elon Musk talking to students at the Sorbonne for 10 minutes, condensing down the essence of why climate change is the fundamental issue which we need to focus on as a society. And I'm going to quickly see if I can get my screen share to show you a little taste of how that looks. Okay, you should be able to see, stop, Kazem, let me know if this is not showing a picture of the climate-friendly travel portal, which has 12 different sections on it, ranging from climate change to the fourth industrial revolution. Each of these sections has information in here, which is multimedia content, focusing on all of the different issues relating to climate-friendly travel. And you can see here, we've got the climate scientist, Bill Nye, who does a brilliant 101 talk on the fundamentals of climate change. Vandana Shiva there, who I mentioned before, talking about climate chaos and what is at risk. There's so much good information. We just want to act as a conduit to helping to make what we feel is the most valuable information and resources available to people who are studying and developing their careers in this area. We also have an analytics section within the portal, which comes from a wide range of organizations. You can see here, we're looking at anyone from between the UN Global Compact, World Travel and Tourism Council, OECD. There's, again, you know, this is just a different way of showing the information about the impacts of climate change. And if I just click on this one, which is an interactive on the carbon map, I can't actually show, oh, there we go. This just shows the different ways of looking at the data through an online interactive graphic, people at risk, the emissions, and just using easy to access tools to explain about the really fundamental issues at stake here. We've also got an innovation hub, which is linked to our registry. And that, again, it's going into what we feel are the most useful resources for companies and communities who are delivering and developing climate action plans. And it's there to support them. All of this is about providing tools and resources to help companies, communities, and individuals who are developing climate-friendly travel as an intrinsic part of their activity, whether they're a company who is developing it as part of their corporate social responsibility, or a student who wants to go on and pursue a career within the sustainable tourism sector, but with a particular focus on climate change. There are big benefits here. There's the linkage between the climate champions who are coming through this program. All we're doing is we're helping to identify the rising stars, the next generation of climate change champions, and then trying to link them with the companies who are putting this at the forefront of their agenda, who want to make climate-friendly travel a core part of their corporate social responsibility. And with our diploma, there's very much that linkage. The people who are graduating from the diploma program, we will then go on to identify placements and employment opportunities within the sustainability divisions, within companies, but also at a community level, within government, within NGOs, and make that linkage between the training that we're doing and identifying these rising stars, the Greta Thunbergs of travel and tourism, as Jeffrey described them, and putting them into action, into the community and into companies where they can really make the most difference. And it's that supporting the leadership change, which I think is essential to both the Climate Champions program, but also the Climate Friendly Travel Diploma. And all of this is very much interlinked. The registry is there to support the companies. The diploma and the Climate Champions program is there to support the next generation, the people who are focusing their research, their education, and their careers on climate-friendly travel. And that is essentially the gist of my presentation about the Climate Champions program and how it links with all of our other work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ollie, as ever. Very clear and very informative. And thank you for, well, thank you generally for your work in the program. As I say, without you, there would be no program. Jafar, I'm going to hand the floor to you now and Kazem to intervene, to comment on this, and then we'll open the floor to everybody here. I see hands are raised, and I think we're going to try to do this by asking you to unmute your mic when I ask you to speak, and then you can ask or comment. It doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment, a view, some thoughts on what we're discussing today. But first of all, Jafar and then Kazem, I think. You have to unmute, Jafar. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Kazem, since I know your comments would be more technical, maybe it is better if we go first to you, as you will be focusing on the very subject of climate change and your experiences. I will be going to a softer area, which I call it something else. So let's go to, if I may pass on the podium to you, Kazem, and then I come back.
Thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity. I was waiting for that opportunity to listen to you guys all together, because I know when you, whether you're doing separately, but having you all together here is a very good chance and opportunity. I've been teaching ecotourism and environmental tourism for about 10 years now. And I've been asked by my students that tourism is a user. It utilizes natural resources. The industry is huge and it damaged the earth and the resources. How can we imagine ecotourism, environmental friendly tourism, and how can we combine the industry and the principles of tourism with natural resource conservation itself? So to me, ecotourism or travel for conservation is a difficult concept to deliver and to teach to my students who are thinking that by the act of traveling, we are damaging and we are utilizing or in many cases overusing the nature. So this fact has made me to think about how to convince the student, especially, that tourism also has benefits. Tourism has revenues. Tourism has its economy, and the economy, revenue, and benefit of the industry itself can be overpassing the costs. And if tourism is well managed, it can create more benefit than the damage that in general cause for the environment. And if that revenue is properly, let's say, taxed or used for nature conservation, or to make sure it happens, we need kind of administration in general. So registration in the technical terms that I heard in your presentation is one of that. So I want Jeffrey to comment on this, if I'm right when I'm answering this question to my student or not. You're muted,
Jeffrey.
I didn't quite hear. I heard your comments. Will you just give me the nub of the question in the comments?
It's mainly the case when people travel to a destination. They utilize the nature and natural resources. By the act of traveling, they damage the nature itself and they produce carbon. So how can we combine traveling with conservation? And how can we claim that the environmental friendly tourism exists itself?
Well, I mean, this is an eternal question that you hear in so many discussion groups, and I've heard one of the answers is that even by breathing, we interfere with nature, which doesn't mean that we should stop breathing. In our philosophy, in our understanding, communities and companies which want to specify a nature-based product need to find the SDGs which relate to that specific product. And that SDG will have some targets and it will have some indicators. And they then have to craft a plan for their, if it's a company, for their business, and if it's a community, for their governance, that ensures to the maximum extent possible, tourism supports and doesn't destroy nature. And hopefully, if it's a community and it has that goal, I mean, an African community which wants to preserve its wildlife as a tourist resort and wants to stop poaching, may well develop a framework of governance which is going to empower local villages to be the custodians of particular areas of land and particular species conservation. And in our vision of how that will play out over time, the international community will be providing funds to allow these villages and communities and the companies to transform. Now, that funding system has been promised. It was when they had the discussion in Rio in 1992, Maurice Strong actually set up a kind of green development fund. And with every one of the annual COP meetings, there have been further refinements of that fund. And I believe one of the reasons why Donald Trump pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement is he didn't want to pay any money for other people, other countries to make that transformation. In our world that we're in, and I'm talking now SUNx Malta, we're assuming the climate framework exists and develops and that funds will be developed. Our registry will be a place where people will file their plans in conformity with nature-based solutions. Third parties who are giving funds will be able to see those plans recorded and see how they cross-correlate to the overall goals of the $100 billion a year climate fund, which is in place. So they'll get financial support. And if they get financial support, they'll continue to do it more and more. And the registry will show that they're doing this. So I think the first point to answer to your question is people have to decide themselves that they want to use nature in a positive way, they want to preserve nature, and they want to they make a plan to do this. And all we can do is provide a vehicle which allows them to manifest that plan. So if a village outside Nairobi decides that it wants to prevent poaching, and it wants to have its people serve as custodians of the local wildlife, it develops this in a plan. And with support maybe from a local university, it defines that plan in terms of the funds that are needed, the jobs that people would have to do to become rangers and this kind of thing. And that will all be recorded in a plan, and it will also be related to their carbon. At some stage, it may say, we intend to put in place electric vehicles for use by the rangers. And we'll have so many vehicles and it'll cost so much. This will allow us to reduce carbon, but to get the vehicles costs money. So we believe we will need X million dollars for those vehicles. And that will all be recorded on the registry, and donors and people who are administrators of the plan, as a first step, will be able to go in and look at the registry and see how they can, if the proposals which are being put in front of them for support and for funding have some validity, or if they're just pulled out of thin air. Beyond that, I think the international community is also moving to support nature conservation. I think you've seen, I use Africa again, the African Parks Foundation has been very active in getting countries to declare national parks, to protect them, to protect the wildlife, and to seek funding support. At the end of the day, so much of it boils down to funding support. Whether it comes from the public sector, from an international fund, or through funds provided by tourists. That's deemed to be one of the biggest areas in which tourism can actually help local communities. And I mean, all we can do is show good examples in our support hub, in our innovation hub, so that, again, a country in a company who's operating in Botswana can see something which is working in Kenya, or something of a totally different kind which is working in Australia. And I think we're moving into a big information sharing period. And that information, I mean, in a way, there's almost too much information. The easy way to find a solution now is not to do traditional research, it's to Google it. And you Google it and you get, 2 million entries. What we're trying to do is to, as Ollie used the word, curate that information. And through our system, which is very basic at this moment, we're starting off in this game. I don't want to pretend that, we've got an incredible Encyclopedia Britannica of work, but we have a system. And that's the most important thing in my view, in this framework, is that there's a system which people can consistently go to and use and know they'll get help for it. And I repeat, there's a cost, but the cost isn't with us. We want to do this basically for a filing fee. The cost will come from the commitment by companies and communities to a certain lifestyle. And that's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you so much.
Can I add just something, Kazem? Because I think what Jeffrey said about the tourism actually providing some of the resources. I think what we've seen with COVID, that many of the wildlife tourism activities, particularly in Africa, have struggled because of the reduction of tourism. So I think whilst people are concerned about tourism having a negative effect, it is also extremely important for maintaining some of the areas that are attractive to tourists. The big issue there is, and again, this comes down to having the right plans and having them registered, does the revenue that is created actually go back into the activities? And that is why we want these plans to be registered, so you can basically track and you can see where the money goes and where the activities go.
Thanks, Hans. Jafar, you indicated that you wanted to come back after Kazem and make some comments. Do you want to do that now? Or shall we take
I can do that with
questions
pleasure.
and comments?
Yes, with pleasure. Jeffrey, in your opening remarks, you talked about domestic tourism. You mentioned domestic tourism and international tourism. And I think I heard you saying that domestic tourism is 4 times larger than international. In my opinion, I will connect it to the subject of this workshop anyway. In my assessment and what I've read here and there, domestic tourism is much, much, much larger than international tourism. I have seen numbers as much as 90%, 95% of tourism is domestic tourism. If you take China alone as one country, the numbers I've seen is 5 billion trips in China alone, domestic. So what is my point here? We are not talking about domestic international tourism. We are talking about climate change. And we are talking about the subject of this workshop, which is a small community, small entrepreneurs. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, if you add up the small companies and entrepreneurs and communities together, that would be larger than the former sector of tourism. Now, my point is that we need to get our message to a huge number of people who are not they do not have the tradition of seeking information and solution. They improvise as they do business. They don't follow guidelines. And the message that we often broadcast would be heard, if heard, by bigger companies, which need to get support from the government, from the banks, from the institutions. The small communities expect for the solution to walk to them, to go to them, to be handed to them. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we also have to think about the corporate culture and community culture. A number of times everybody talked about community, but what makes a community community is the culture of that community that makes it community. So I think that the concepts that we are trying to promote, which is preservation, climate-friendly travel, etc., needs to be blended into the local culture. It needs to be accepted. It should be relevant to them. So as long as the culture does not value climate change, local culture does not value climate change, as long as people may say, yeah, I agree with it, but when in practice they don't do it, I think the message would not go far enough. The subject is big, but we are talking about the bulk of tourism, which is a small community. So I think our talk should not be big, but should be small talk. So how can we reduce our talk to something that they can hear, they can relate to, and they would follow. So it again goes back to community, it goes to the culture, to the corporate culture, and these are the issues that we will be talking about. Carbon emissions, etc. The people who are in hard science and can relate to hard science can visualize, can see it, can feel it, etc. But the smaller communities, they look at things somehow differently, in my opinion.
Well, it's not often that I find myself disagreeing with you, Jafar, but
I know we do, yeah.
I think I would like to, because I think if you take a today shot in time, yeah, I think your comment is right. But we're talking about a 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 year moment in the future. There are a number of developments which will change that paradigm that you're talking about. One of them is the spread of technology. We know, to take Africa or India, where the big numbers of population are, Indonesia, we know that technology companies are doing amazing things like putting balloons up in the atmosphere so that Wi-Fi messages can come in ways they've never come before. We know that in China, you can acquire a mobile phone which is good and good enough for information at I don't know, €5. We know that companies like Microsoft are developing, and Google are developing mechanisms for local communities to go into that last mile, the place where the internet never reaches. So that's one change. The second change, young people. Young people, even in widespread communities, get information, and they get it in school now, if there is a school in the community. There's an Earth Day. The students that we have on our course in Malta at the moment, from an entirely diverse background around the world, 30 countries, and all of them have had Earth Day in school. Now, most of the older people in this session, and by older I mean who were in school before 1972 when there was an Earth Day, and probably before 1980, before there was really any manifestation of that, they did not have this background and this training. And the third point, I think, which will change things, and I mentioned it in my talk, is the regulation. National governments, every one of them, is filing every year what is called an NDC, a nationally determined contribution. And that nationally determined contribution is played out in local governments across the country. They're developing information systems, even into small communities. Another thing that will help, I think, is there will be money available. Small communities will be able to see that if they join the low carbon club, they get access to funds which they otherwise couldn't get. And if they don't join it, they probably have penalties. And so I think I agree with what you're saying conceptually, but I think if you look into the future, you can see that we are moving towards this interconnected world. And last point in response to what you said, I'm sure you remember Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock. And the bottom thesis in Toffler's book, I remember it well because it was a game changer in my lifetime. And basically it said, the pace of change is accelerating. It's moving so much faster than you can predict. So 10 years going forward, in terms of technology and society change, is like 30 years backwards. So I think if we keep in mind the issues that you've raised, but recognize that the next generation, and with the new technologies which are improving all the time, from the big ones which give more internet access to the small ones which make mobile phones available for a few euros, I think we will be able to get those communities. And then the last point I want to make, and I think you might make this for me, what I've discovered over my lifetime in dealing in countries and communities around the world, everybody says our ancestors, indigenous people, the First Nations, the Aborigines, they lived with nature, they believed in nature. For them, they did things which were conservationist by nature. I think there is a large amount of that thinking coming back into our life. And I think that's one of the lessons from COVID.
Jeffrey, I don't think we are disagreeing with each other. Actually, it's a time frame that I'm talking about. I think your comments are all about the future that we would like to have as far as 2050, and this SDG would help us to get there. I have no problem with that. I'm with you. We are on the same page. But I'm more in the present tense, not future tense. I'm saying that present tense, the community is small. They even do not know how to apply or register.
That's what we got Hanson Rose for. And that's why we have easy access. If you go onto our registry site, which is actually called climate-friendly.travel, climate-friendly.travel, the first thing you see, and this is modern technology, is one of these little bots where it says, how can we help you? We're going to actually make it look like Rose at some stage. But it's just, it's a robot which you put a question in, it comes back, and our group, our small group, as we grow it with our students moving out there, will actually tune in and help people and give them answers. We have to teach the small communities to use the system. I agree with you entirely. And that's, we've set it up in order to do that. And I have to say one last thing. Thanks to the government of Malta, which were incredibly supportive of these concepts and with whom we signed a 5-year agreement, which says, look, basically you've got enough money to make this happen, which most organizations like SUNx spend 90% of their time trying to source funds from somewhere to help them stay alive. We don't have to do that. The government of Malta were good enough and kind enough, and we are very respectful of that. We try not to do stupid things, and we think we can provide a growing system. And honestly, I'm really serious to you and Kazem and to all the people on the course here. We know that if we can reach out in 2 hours in a session like this, and we convince you that, we're in the right direction, you convince somebody else. And one of them will come along and ask to befriend Rose or Ollie. And we'll build this community, and it'll take time. I will not be around to see it, but I'll be there to start it and to help, and you too, Jafar, You know, I think we have there we have a similar vision. What I'd like to do now is ask, I know there was one hand was floating. I've never learned how to actually raise my hand on this. I'd love to know, but I put a note in the chat. If you're happy writing questions, write them. But otherwise, just unmute yourself and ask a question. We'd love to, I know we've been talking for a long time, but you know, it's a complex issue in a big world, which is kind of globally easy and locally complicated.
While we are waiting for questions, let me add a comment here. You also mentioned education, and of course, you are delivering that education through the system that you have set up in Malta, and a team and mission I believe in. But let's talk about education in more general sense, which is my field, which is Kazim's daily profession. Unfortunately, our education is also dealing with the formal sector of tourism, not the informal. All the examples we use are big companies, big entities. Thanks to Airbnb, we have started talking small, but the curriculum of education in hospitality and tourism is also thinking big. And I think we have to influence the curriculum to start thinking small. And the thing we have to make is to say that the bulk of tourism is a small operation, not big operations. So we even have problem at the education level of bringing down the subject to the level of smallness. You're muted. Jeffrey, you're muted.
Sorry, excuse me. You're the only person I know in the world who can make Airbnb synonymous with small.
I said, thanks to Airbnb, we have started thinking small. I know, but they're dealing with the small things, but the small things together has made Airbnb as big as it is.
I think Goldman Sachs and Airbnb think big. But sorry, look, I really, I saw Reza Sultani. You seem to be wanting to unmute. I don't want to put you on the spot. If you have any questions, please feel free to do so. Whilst you're waiting to do, I do have a question from Farouk Yusufzoda. What is the suggestion for developing countries in development of tourism policy, where the economic resources are much more limited? I mean, I'll give you my take on it. Many developing countries have untapped assets in their tourism potential and a massive opportunity to leapfrog over some of the challenges that others have found. I also think that tourism can be a very dangerous bedfellow. I think if you put all of your eggs in the tourism basket, as so many countries, for example, in the Caribbean have done, when you get an economic downturn or you have a problem from an originating country, you put your whole economy at risk. So I've come to believe over time that developing countries would do well to create tourism, but to have a mixed economic framework that goes with it, that they're not totally dependent on it. And because if something goes wrong, you're dead.
May I add my comments to this question? Developing countries is a subject I have always dealt with. Actually, the first thesis I wrote in the last century was about impact of tourism in developing countries. The problem with developing countries of then and the developing countries of today is the only thing they look at is international tourism, not domestic tourism. Of course, I realize there are some countries, island countries, that domestic tourism doesn't mean much. But all the developing countries are thinking about arrivals and departure in the sense of international. Again, if we emphasize that domestic tourism is very large, and if we emphasize that large companies in tourism are not very many, and the bulk is small, maybe that would change the picture. I think the developing countries need to wake up to realize that, yes, international tourism brings foreign exchange, etc. But the bulk of tourism in India, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Brazil, in Argentina is domestic tourism. So I think we have to realize that, and also realize that the small operators together have generated a large sector. That's my comments.
Yeah, and it's a very valid comment, and has been shown, particularly in the COVID era, that this is perhaps the only tourism that you can have, because your borders remain intact, and to the extent that you have an ability for people to move about, an ability for people to socially distance with masks, you can still do that domestically. And an increasing number of people are turning to that. And I'll make a second point. In China, you mentioned China and the large numbers of domestic tourists. I was fortunate enough to be engaged with the Chinese government when I was working with WTTC. We took a group of a dozen chief executives, chairmen of the big travel and tourism companies, into China 3 or 4 times for 1 week at a time, and working with the China National Tourism Authority, which was the senior body in those days. And when I say working, I mean sitting around a big conference table and jackets off and actually working, really, as they developed their domestic tourism policy. Before 1990, domestic tourism was not allowed in China. And in 1995, I think it was, they identified 12 areas where they would allow domestic tourism to develop, to take place. And they were ring-fenced areas, because in China in those days, you couldn't move around the country so freely. And I mean, they did it step by step in the brilliant way that China unveils things over 5-year plans. And today, it's, as you say, it's a 5 billion travelers a year, 4 billion travelers a year, whatever it is. It's phenomenal. So I think there's a good example. You do it carefully. You have to plan like hell. And again, that's a bit of a problem, because most developing countries don't actually have those kind of frameworks that allow them to do that.
I would very much like to hear Rose's comments on this subject as well, but while she's getting ready to comment, I want to go back to international tourism versus domestic tourism, and then it connects to our subject anyway. And since the question was about developing countries, I think if the developing countries ask another question from themselves, a few things would become relevant. A developing country has to also ask itself, how much my own citizens are spending to go to other countries. In many countries, tourism export is smaller than tourism import. So I am not going to name countries, but there are many countries that the number and the volume of money spent by citizens in foreign countries, in other countries, is much larger. So developing countries have to do a sort of wake-up, re-evaluation of tourism, and maybe they have to do something with domestic tourism. And domestic tourism is easier to be managed by the government than international matters. So this is my comment about that, but I very much would like to hear Rose's comments, having definitely different perspectives.
Thank you so much, Jafar. I think you managed to see my body language, because I really wanted to make a comment from my experience as a public sector policymaker, and also as a citizen of this country who is a potential domestic tourist. What I've observed using the case of Zimbabwe is that you start with the product. It has been developed in such a way that it suits international tourism. So if you are talking about the locals, their idea of tourism or fun is totally different from the international. So it becomes a challenge, because here we're talking about superstructures. We're talking about, in one of the biggest national parks, there is the Wange Lodge, possibly with 200 rooms. But the kind of person who wants to go there wants to stay maybe in accommodation facilities where they go as a family, and there might be 10 or 12. So already you have these superstructures which cannot accommodate or cannot survive from domestic tourism. So already at policy level, there's need to cater for that kind of tourist in terms of size, in terms of the disposable income. And at some point, we were pushing for tourism at school-going age. Yes, it was good to fill up the gap, but if you take school children to a 5-star hotel, already it's a challenge. So really, there's need to inculcate a culture of holiday taking at policy level. I worked in a state enterprise where one of the benefits was regional travel, and we would all go to South Africa. We never bothered to go around Zimbabwe. So even at government level, there's that need to push for locals to go on holiday, those who have sufficient disposable income to take holidays locally. If there's one thing which I would say COVID-19 has benefited tourism, is that, for example, the coming festive season, most of the people who have disposable income have no choice but to visit locally. And I'm hoping that slowly but surely there's going to be an appreciation that within Zimbabwe, there are beautiful places to go. A certain class or segment, market segment, which can afford to go on holiday. But previously, it was holiday outside Zimbabwe, which were more, for lack of a better, sexy for the kids to talk about, for anyone to say, I was in Cape Town for my holiday. And yet one could have been in the Bonaire National Park. So it's also a culture change which needs to happen to promote domestic tourism. Otherwise, there's a feeling that if you visit locally, you haven't gone on holiday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions or comments? It's now, we've been doing this now for almost 2 hours, I think, if I'm right by my calculation, and we planned it for 90 minutes. And I know how these things can go on, and people begin to think, when the hell are they going to close this down? So I'm kind of wondering if there are any questions. It would be good to hear them now. If not, I would like to just say, from the perspective of SUNx Malta, how much we appreciate Kazem and Jafar for giving us this opportunity. We haven't done it before as a team, and the fact that, you know, the people who came in are pretty much still here at the end of it is either a testimony to your patience or to the fact that we do have a message to give which you might find useful. So I'd just like to thank you all for being part of this, and feel free to question us outside this. Jafar, we can give everybody our web contacts. If you, as I say, for the registry, you look for climatefriendly.travel, and otherwise it's www.thesunprogram.com. And we're pretty open about our responses. So on behalf of our group, I'd just like to thank the organizers and the participants. And if there are no more comments, Jafar, I hand the meeting back to you.
Well, thank you. Our thanks goes to SUNx, of course, and to yourself, Jeffrey, to Oli, to Rose, to Hans, and also to Kazim, who was one of the contributors in the discussion, for doing this. Let me mention something that may not be readily known to you, and that is we are not looking at a webinar as an end to itself. We are creating a library of videos, and our past videos have been viewed many times, some of them even assigned in classrooms to the students. And this particular webinar, I'm pretty sure, is going to be one that would be reviewed in many classrooms. Many discussions would be generated from it. So I want to assure you that this has a long shelf value, and it's not ending at this point. I also thank everybody, the participants, the speakers, and we do this again we do different topics, all of them about small communities, and we also do them in foreign languages. Our next one would be in Chinese. It's going to be on December 15 in Chinese language. I mean, we already have done one in Persian language. We have done one in Portuguese language. Chinese is next. Then we have Spanish, and we move on. And the reason we did that is because the small communities, if they are our audience, they don't necessarily speak English. So we have to go to the local languages and talk small in order to talk to small communities. So once more, thank you very much for your contributions, and we'll see you in the next webinars.
Jafar,
Thank you very much.
I just want to say
Bye-bye.
that if we'd known that you were going to create a sort of library file and use this for education, we'd have got Ollie to dress better.
Oh my goodness.
Ollie has already done quite well, and the logo is also there. And of course, the website would remain active. The website we have today is not going to be history. It's going to be part of the library. So the information is going to be there.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Good day. Good night.
Thank you, Jafar. Thank you, Kasim.
Thank you.
Thank